Have you ever wondered how far someone is willing to go for love? Or what happens when trust is broken in the most unexpected way? In the heart of the bustling city of Lagos, a tale of love, betrayal, and life-altering decisions unfolds. Victoria, a beautiful and innocent young African woman, had it all: beauty, grace, and dreams of a perfect future. But what happens when she falls in love with someone who harbors dark secrets? Victoria, a 22-year-old university student, had always been focused on her studies, excelling in her courses and maintaining a well-earned reputation as a decent young woman. She lived in a modest home with her parents in Lagos, a city that never slept. It was the dream of every Nigerian youth to make a name for themselves, and Victoria was no exception. She had her sights set on a bright future, but there was one thing that threatened to change it all: love. She had met John, a handsome, wealthy young man, in her second year at college. From the first day they spoke, sparks flew. John, with his charming smile and captivating personality, quickly swept Victoria off her feet. He was everything she had ever wanted: intelligent, successful, and admired by all. They became inseparable, spending long hours together on campus, exchanging thoughts and dreams for the future. But as their bond deepened, Victoria began to sense something darker in John, a secret he seemed unwilling to share. The school went on a brief break, and Victoria, feeling a growing connection to John, decided to visit him at his luxurious home. She had no idea that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter her life forever. As she walked up to his door, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Little did she know, she was about to step into a nightmare. Victoria's heart raced as she stood outside John's sprawling mansion in the upscale part of Lagos. It wasn't the first time she'd been to his home, but this time felt different. Something in the air was thick with tension. John had been away on a short trip to see his family, and she had waited for him to return before visiting. When she called earlier, he sounded eager to have her over. She couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something more profound, something that would change the course of her life. John's house was impressive, larger than anything Victoria had ever seen. The gates opened smoothly as she approached, and she was greeted by a quiet, efficient housekeeper who led her to the sitting room. As she sat down, her thoughts wandered to the times they had shared in college, the late-night study sessions, the deep conversations about their future, and the way John made her feel like the only woman in the world. But today felt different. There was a coldness in the air that Victoria couldn't quite place. When John finally walked in, his face was unreadable. He smiled at her, but there was something off about it. A chill ran down her spine as he leaned in for a hug, his embrace tighter than usual. She brushed it off as a fleeting feeling, but deep down, her intuition was telling her that something wasn't right. John invited her to dinner, and they ate in relative silence, the tension between them growing by the minute. Victoria tried to shake the unsettling feeling that had settled in her chest, but when John excused himself to take a call, she found herself alone in the grand dining room, surrounded by opulence but feeling more isolated than ever. And then it happened, a knock at the door that would turn everything upside down. Victoria stared at the door as the sudden knock echoed through the mansion, sending a ripple of unease through her body. She had never been one to be easily frightened, but something about this moment felt entirely wrong. Her heart raced as she glanced at John, who had just returned from his phone call. He didn't seem concerned, but his eyes looked distant, almost as if he were trying to hide something. "Victoria, don't worry," John said, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "It's just a business matter. I'll be right back." She nodded, though she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had heard stories of Lego's high society being involved in shady dealings, but she never thought John, the man she loved, could be a part of it. As he walked away, the heavy silence in the room pressed down on her. The mansion that had once felt so welcoming now seemed oppressive, as though it were watching her. She was left alone in the dining room, her mind racing with questions. Who was at the door? What kind of business did John really deal in? Victoria's thoughts were interrupted when the door to the kitchen creaked open. A figure stepped in, a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, wearing a dark suit, and his face was hidden in the shadows. His presence seemed almost menacing, and Victoria could feel a chill run down her spine. Before she could react, John appeared, his face now twisted in a way that she had never seen before. He quickly shut the door behind him and locked it, not sparing her a glance. "Victoria, I need you to stay here. Please," he said, his tone harsh. "Whatever you hear, don't open the door." Her heart pounded in her chest. This was not the man she had fallen in love with, and her instincts told her that things were about to take a very dark turn. Victoria's mind raced as she sat in the grand dining room, trying to process what had just happened. She could hear muffled voices from the other side of the locked door. John was talking to the stranger, his tone urgent and low. There was an unfamiliar tension in his voice, and for the first time, Victoria felt a deep sense of fear for her safety. John had always seemed like the perfect gentleman, charming, successful, and kind-hearted. But now, she was beginning to wonder if she had been wrong about him all along. The John she had known and loved was slowly slipping away, replaced by someone far more dangerous. She could no longer ignore the fact that something was terribly wrong. As the conversation continued, Victoria's curiosity and anxiety grew. She strained to hear the words, but they were too faint. Then, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a faint scream, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing to the ground. Victoria jumped to her feet, her heart in her throat. The scream was unmistakable, and she felt an overwhelming need to know what was happening. She approached the door cautiously, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. She didn't know what she expected to find on the other side, but the fear in her chest made it clear that she couldn't just sit back and wait any longer. She twisted the handle. As the door creaked open, Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The sight before her was beyond anything she could have imagined. John stood in the middle of the lavish living room, his face pale, and his hands covered in blood. The stranger from earlier was nowhere to be seen, but there, lying motionless on the floor, was a body. Victoria's legs buckled beneath her as she tried to process the scene. It felt like time itself had frozen, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. The body was of a man, but it wasn't just any man, it was someone she recognized. It was the same man she had seen John speak to moments ago, and his face was now twisted in a permanent expression of pain. Her pulse raced as John turned to face her, his eyes wide with a mixture of panic and guilt. "Victoria, I didn't mean for this to happen," he whispered, his voice shaky. "I didn't want this, but you have to understand. I was forced into this. It wasn't my choice." Victoria's heart thudded painfully in her chest as she stepped back, her body trembling. Her thoughts were spinning, and the world around her seemed to collapse. The love she had for John, the trust she had placed in him, was now shattered. She realized that everything she thought she knew about him had been a lie. But as she turned to flee, a voice stopped her. A voice that would change the course of her life forever. Victoria froze, her body still shaking as she heard the voice. It was faint, almost a whisper, but it carried an undeniable weight. "Don't leave, Victoria," John's voice called out, pleading, as if he were trying to reach through the walls of her mind. She turned slowly, her eyes locking with his, searching for any sign of the man she had once loved. But all she saw was a stranger, a person wrapped in fear and desperation. The man who had once promised her a future full of love and happiness now seemed like a shadow of that person, someone completely unrecognizable. "John, what happened? Who is that man?" Victoria's voice trembled, her throat tight with emotion. She had never felt so conflicted, so torn between the love she had for him and the horror she now felt. She needed answers, but she was terrified of what they might be. John's face twisted with guilt as he stepped closer, his hands still trembling. "Victoria, you don't understand. This wasn't supposed to happen. That man was my business associate. He was going to ruin everything, and I had no choice. I had to protect us. I had to protect you," he said, his voice breaking. Victoria's stomach churned. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Had John really just killed someone to protect her? Or was this all just a twisted lie designed to keep her entangled in his world? Her legs gave way as she sank to the floor, her mind racing with thoughts and emotions she could barely control. John knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder, but she flinched away, unable to trust him anymore. "Please, Victoria, don't leave me. We can fix this. I'll make everything right," he begged, his voice now desperate, almost frantic. But Victoria had heard enough. She could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air like a noose, tightening around her. She had to get away, away from the man she once loved and the danger that seemed to cling to him like a dark cloud. Victoria didn't know what to do. Her mind was a storm of thoughts, fear, and confusion. The room around her seemed to close in, the walls pressing in on her. She could feel John's presence beside her, but it felt suffocating, like a predator watching its prey. Her pulse quickened as the urge to run, to escape, overwhelmed her. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, but she couldn't just walk out the front door. The mansion was too large, and there were too many secrets lurking in the shadows. What if John wasn't the only threat? What if his business extended beyond what he had already confessed? "I need to go," Victoria whispered, standing up abruptly. She couldn't even look at John. She knew he was still watching her, waiting for her to change her mind, but she couldn't let him control her anymore. She had to leave, before it was too late. John grabbed her arm, his grip firm and insistent. "Victoria, please. Don't do this. You don't understand. If you leave now, you'll be in danger. I can't protect you if you go." Her breath caught in her throat as his words hit her like a slap. The warning was clear, but it only made her more determined. She had to escape. She had to be free. "I don't believe you anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that pulsed through her veins. "You've lied to me. You've changed. You're not the person I thought you were." With a final, sharp tug, she wrenched her arm free from his grasp and turned toward the door. She had to get to safety, no matter the cost. But as she reached for the handle, something stopped her. A chilling voice, soft and threatening, echoed from the shadows. "Leaving so soon, Victoria?" Victoria's heart dropped as she turned to face the source of the voice. Emerging from the shadows was a figure she had never seen before. He was tall, dressed in a black suit that seemed to swallow the light around him. His face was partially obscured by a dark, ominous hood, but his eyes gleamed with cold intent. Who are you?" Victoria's voice quivered with fear, though she stood tall, refusing to show weakness. The figure stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm someone who knows the real story, Victoria. I'm someone who knows exactly what John has been hiding from you." Victoria's blood ran cold. She had no idea who this man was, but the fear in his eyes made it clear, he was no ally. She stepped back, her hands shaking as she tried to steady her breath. "John told me everything. He just doesn't know that I've been watching him all along," the man said, his voice low and menacing. "And now, you're in the middle of it all." Victoria's eyes darted to John, whose expression had gone pale. His lips trembled as he looked between her and the stranger, the guilt in his eyes growing. "No. I didn't mean for you to get caught up in this," John whispered. "But this isn't over. The danger is far from gone." Victoria's world seemed to tilt on its axis as the mysterious man stepped closer, his words sinking deep into her soul. "John, what do you mean? What are you hiding?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. John, who had once seemed like her safe haven, now appeared to be drowning in his own lies. He turned his gaze toward the stranger, his face filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. "Victoria, please, you have to listen to me," John pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to get involved in all of this. But there are things you don't understand. Things that are bigger than both of us." The stranger, who had remained eerily silent until now, let out a soft chuckle that sent chills down Victoria's spine. "He's right. There's a lot you don't know, Victoria. John's been lying to you, not just about who he is, but about what he's really involved in." Victoria's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process the enormity of what the man was saying. She had trusted John, loved him with all her heart. Could it all have been a lie? She felt betrayed, her trust in him crumbling before her eyes. "You don't need to worry about John anymore," the man continued. "I'm here to make sure you get the truth. The whole truth." John's face darkened at the man's words. "No. You don't understand. I did what I had to do," he muttered, his voice laced with desperation. "I never wanted this to happen, Victoria. But now it's too late." Victoria felt the weight of the words sink in. Something was terribly wrong, and she couldn't ignore the gut-wrenching feeling that she was in deeper danger than she could ever imagine. Victoria's heart raced, her mind spinning as the stranger's words began to sink in. "The truth," she repeated, almost to herself, trying to make sense of the chaos around her. "What truth? What do you mean?" She couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something far darker than she could comprehend. The stranger stepped forward, his gaze never leaving John. "John's been playing a dangerous game, Victoria. He's been part of a criminal network, one that stretches far beyond what you can imagine. Money laundering, illegal deals, and now you're tangled up in it too." John's face twisted with anger, his voice rising. "That's not true. I'm not like that. I never meant for things to go this far." But the stranger ignored him, his attention solely on Victoria now. It's too late for him to deny it. The evidence is all around him. The mansion, the money, the people he's been involved with, they're all tied to something much darker than you can see. Victoria's mind raced as the stranger's words echoed in her ears. Could it be true? Had she been so blind to the man she thought she knew? She had always believed John was different from the others in their circle, but now, she was beginning to question everything. Had she been living in a fantasy? You're lying. Victoria shot back, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. I can't believe this. John would never. John's voice cracked. I'm sorry, Victoria. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. But now, there's no turning back. The man smiled, as though he had been waiting for this moment. You're right about one thing, Victoria. There's no turning back now. Victoria stood there, caught in the middle of a conflict she never asked to be a part of. The revelation about John's dark secrets had left her reeling. She could hardly recognize the man who had once been her everything. He had promised her the world, yet now she stood before a broken version of the man she loved, his apologies doing little to soothe the storm inside her. The stranger, watching her carefully, continued with a cold smile. Victoria, this isn't just about John anymore. You're now part of a much bigger game, a game that plays with people's lives. John's fate is already sealed, but you still have a chance to walk away. Victoria's mind was in turmoil. The man's words hung in the air like an omen, heavy with implications. Could she really just walk away from this? Could she turn her back on everything she thought she knew? You want me to leave him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You want me to just walk away from the man I thought I loved? After everything we've been through? The stranger shook his head slowly. It's not that simple, Victoria. John's not the only one who has to face consequences. People like you, innocent, caught in the crossfire, they're often the ones who suffer the most. But you still have a choice. John, who had been silent, his hands trembling at his sides, finally spoke up. Victoria, I never wanted this for you. I never wanted you to get hurt. But if you leave now, if you walk away from this, they won't stop looking for you. You're safer here with me. We can fix this. I'll make sure you're protected. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Protected? By you? After everything that's happened? I can't trust you anymore, John. John's face twisted in anguish. Please, just listen to me. I'm not the man you think I am. I didn't want any of this. But now, I have to deal with the consequences of my actions. The stranger smiled darkly. The truth is, there's no easy way out. No matter what you decide, Victoria, your life will never be the same again. Victoria stood at the crossroads, torn between two paths that both seemed to lead into darkness. Her heart ached as she looked between John and the stranger, the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her chest. John, the man she thought she knew, was now a stranger to her, his words filled with regret, but also with an underlying fear that she couldn't ignore. I didn't want to pull you into this, John said, his voice shaking. I swear, I didn't plan for you to get involved in any of this mess. I thought we could have a normal life. But now everything is different. Victoria took a deep breath, her mind racing. She could hear the desperation in his voice, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the betrayal she felt. But then, there was the other man, the stranger who claimed to hold the key to the truth. Was he a friend or a foe? Was he lying to manipulate her further? What do you want from me? She finally asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. What is it that you're asking me to do? The stranger's smile widened, his eyes cold and calculating. What I'm asking you to do is simple, Victoria. You have two choices: stay with John, and watch as this all unravels into something far worse than you can imagine. Or, you can walk away and take your chances. You'll be free of all this, but you'll have to live with the consequences of your decisions. You may never be safe again. John's face paled, his eyes filled with panic. Don't listen to him, Victoria. He's trying to manipulate you. Please, trust me. I can fix this. We can fix this together. We can get out of Lagos, start fresh. Victoria's heart pounded as she processed the gravity of his words. There was no easy way out. No matter what she chose, her life would never be the same. Could she really trust John again? Or was she just fooling herself? She turned to the stranger, her voice shaking but firm. What do you mean by consequences? What's really going on here? The stranger chuckled darkly, taking a step closer. You're already in it, Victoria. You just don't know it yet. John's involvement goes much deeper than you realize. The people he's been working with, they're not the type to forgive and forget. If you stay, you'll be a target too. Victoria's mind reeled as the stranger's words echoed in her head. The weight of the situation was suffocating, and she could barely breathe. What had she gotten herself into? She had fallen in love with John, believing him to be the perfect man, but now she was questioning everything. The world she thought she knew was slipping away, replaced by a dark underworld of crime and betrayal. John was still pleading with her, but Victoria was no longer listening. She could feel the icy grip of fear tightening around her chest as she looked around the opulent mansion. The fine decor, the expensive furniture, the luxurious surroundings, it all felt like a facade now. She had been living a lie, and the truth was far more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. John, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. How deep are you really involved in all of this? What are you hiding from me? John flinched, his face pale. He opened his mouth to speak but hesitated. The silence between them grew unbearable, and in that moment, Victoria knew that he was hiding something even darker than she could fathom. I never meant for this to go this far, John finally admitted, his voice shaking with guilt. But I was in too deep. I've made mistakes, things I can't undo. And now, I can't protect you anymore. Victoria stepped back, her heart breaking as the reality of the situation hit her like a ton of bricks. She had no idea what John was really involved in, but it didn't matter anymore. Trust had been shattered, and there was no going back. The stranger, watching them both, smirked as he watched the tension unfold. It's too late for you to run, Victoria. You're already in this mess. There's no escaping it now. Victoria looked around the room, her mind racing for a way out. The stranger was right about one thing, there was no easy escape. She had to make a choice, and whatever she decided, it would be a life-altering decision. Victoria's heart felt like it was being ripped in two as the words from the stranger echoed in her ears. There was no easy way out. Every decision she made from here on out would lead to consequences she couldn't predict. She had never felt more trapped in her life. John, standing motionless across from her, his hands clenched into fists, seemed like a shadow of the man she had once adored. The man she thought she could build a future with. Now, he was a stranger, a man whose past was filled with darkness and lies. Was he truly remorseful? Or was his guilt just another manipulation, another way to keep her locked in his world? I'm not the man I used to be, Victoria, John's voice trembled. I've made mistakes, things I can't undo, but I'm begging you. Please, don't leave me. If you walk out that door, there's no coming back. Victoria's chest tightened, her head spinning. She wanted to believe in him. She wanted to believe in their love, but the truth was staring her right in the face. This wasn't the life she had dreamed of. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it was all falling apart. The stranger's eyes glinted as he watched her carefully, sensing the internal battle raging inside her. He stepped forward again, his voice low and menacing. You think you have a choice, don't you? But you don't. Not anymore. John is too deep in this to get out. And you? You're already involved. You're already a target. Victoria swallowed hard, the weight of the words sinking in. She couldn't ignore it. There was no running from this. She was caught between two choices, both equally terrifying. Her instincts screamed at her to escape, to leave this nightmare behind and take her chances in the unknown. But could she really leave everything she knew? Could she leave John? I can't stay here, she said quietly, her voice trembling with resolve. I can't live this lie anymore. I won't let myself be dragged into your world, John. John's face fell, his eyes filled with both sorrow and anger. He stepped toward her, but this time, she didn't flinch. The silence between them was deafening, the tension thick and suffocating. You're making a mistake, John whispered, his voice barely audible. You don't know what you're up against. But I'm telling you, if you leave, they won't stop looking for you. They'll come for you, Victoria. Victoria looked at him one last time, her heart breaking for the man he had once been. But she knew deep down that she couldn't stay. She couldn't live in this lie any longer. I'm sorry, John. But this is the only way for me to survive, she whispered, turning toward the door. The door clicked behind her with a finality that sent a shiver through her spine. Victoria stepped out of the mansion into the cool Lagos night, her heart racing as she walked away from the man she had once loved. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the weight of her decision was pulling her down. John's final words echoed in her ears, warning her that she was making a dangerous choice. She had left behind everything, her home, her relationship, and the life she had known. But it didn't matter anymore. Her survival, her peace of mind, was worth more than any life she had lived before. The streets of Lagos seemed colder than usual as Victoria walked through the empty roads. Her thoughts raced, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her, lurking in the shadows. The stranger's words haunted her, there was no escaping the danger. Her name was already on someone's radar. As she passed dark alleyways and empty streets, Victoria couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right choice. Should she have stayed with John? Could she have found a way to escape the underworld he had dragged her into? But it was too late to turn back now. She was on her own, and there was no one left to trust. A chill ran down her spine as a car drove slowly past her, its headlights briefly illuminating the dark road ahead. The vehicle didn't stop, but she felt a strange unease as it disappeared into the night. Victoria quickened her pace, her eyes darting nervously around. Every corner felt like a trap. Every shadow felt like a threat. She was alone now, truly alone. And as the night air grew colder, she realized that her journey had only just begun. The first few days after Victoria left John's mansion were filled with uncertainty. She found herself staying in low-key hotels around Lagos, trying to keep a low profile. She couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were always on her, even when she was alone. Every time someone passed by, every honking car, every shadow, she couldn't escape the paranoia creeping into her every thought. Victoria's life had changed beyond recognition. She couldn't stay in one place too long. She couldn't trust anyone. It felt as though every corner she turned led her further into a labyrinth of fear and betrayal. She had left everything behind, but in doing so, had opened herself up to a whole new set of dangers. But she couldn't go back. That much was clear. No matter what happened, she had made her choice. There was no room for regret. One night, as she sat in her hotel room staring out at the city skyline, she received a message, a single, chilling sentence that made her heart drop. "You can't run forever, Victoria." It was from an unknown number, but she didn't need to see the name to know who it was. It was the stranger. The one who had warned her that leaving would have consequences. Victoria's pulse raced as she read the message. She immediately locked her phone and tossed it onto the bed. The walls of her hotel room felt like they were closing in on her. The warning from the stranger, the reality of the danger she was facing, it was all becoming too much to handle. She couldn't stop shaking. Who else knew where she was? How far had they gone to find her? Victoria knew she couldn't stay in this hotel for much longer. She had to keep moving. She quickly packed her few belongings and rushed out of the room, her mind reeling. Every step felt like it was leading her deeper into a maze from which there was no escape. The streets of Lagos, once so familiar and full of promise, now felt like a trap. She had no one to turn to, no one she could trust. Her phone buzzed again, and with trembling hands, she checked the screen. The message was even more chilling than the first. "You can't outrun your past, Victoria. We're coming for you." The hunt had begun. As days passed, Victoria found herself moving from one safe house to the next. She avoided the main streets, always taking back alleys and side roads, doing everything she could to stay off the radar. But the messages continued, and her fear grew with every passing hour. One evening, as she was walking through a quiet part of the city, she turned a corner and was stopped in her tracks. Standing before her was someone she hadn't expected to see, someone she thought she could trust. It was John. "Victoria," his voice was barely a whisper, filled with a mixture of regret and pain. "I didn't want this. You have to understand. I had no choice. They were going to hurt you if I didn't comply." Victoria stared at him, her heart torn. She had thought he had betrayed her once, but now, standing in front of her, his face filled with remorse, it was as if everything she had known was crumbling. "I thought you were my escape from all this," she whispered. "But you're just as dangerous as they are. You lied to me." "I never wanted this to happen," John said, stepping closer. "I was trying to protect you, Victoria, but now they're after you because you left. They'll never stop until they get what they want." Tears filled Victoria's eyes. The betrayal she felt was unbearable. "I can't trust you anymore, John. You're part of this, and no matter how much I want to believe in you, I can't anymore." With that, she turned and ran, her heart breaking with every step. Victoria had been running for what felt like a lifetime. She had outsmarted everyone, kept a step ahead of them, but now, she was cornered. The final confrontation was inevitable. She had nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. She could feel them closing in on her. As she entered an old, abandoned building, she saw them. The strangers. The ones who had been chasing her all this time. You can't keep running, Victoria, one of them said with a smirk. It's over. Victoria's heart beat wildly in her chest, but she stood her ground. You think you've won? You think I'm going to just give up? The man chuckled darkly. It was never about winning. It's about the inevitable. You're just another casualty of the game. As the man advanced, Victoria's eyes locked on the exit, her only chance to survive. She ran, her legs burning with every step. She could hear them chasing her, but she wouldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything she had gone through. She reached the door just as they were closing in, and with a final burst of strength, she pushed it open and ran into the night. Victoria didn't look back. She had made it out. She had survived. Days later, she found herself in a new city, far from Lagos and the dangers that had haunted her. She had no family, no friends, only the will to start over. It wasn't easy, and it would never be the life she had imagined, but for the first time in a long time, she felt free. Victoria sat down on a bench, staring at the horizon. She had survived the betrayals, the lies, and the endless pursuit. And now, she had one thing left, her life. It was the only thing she could call her own, and for now, it was enough. Thank you for following Victoria's journey. What did you think of the story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales like this one. Stay tuned for more.